The wind howled across the dry plains, carrying with it the scent of smoke and blood. The sun was dying behind the distant ridges, staining the sky in the color of rust. She had been riding since dawn, her skirt torn, hands blistered, eyes stinging from the dust. Every sound behind her made her heart jump. A branch cracking, a horse snorting, the whisper of the desert wind. She had escaped death once that morning, when the raiders burned the stagecoach and left her for dead. But fate wasn't done with her yet. Somewhere in the silence that followed the chaos, she heard a low groan. A man, wounded and breathing heavy. Against every instinct that screamed to run, she went toward it. He was lying half in the shadow of a burned wagon, his chest marked with a bullet graze, his arm bleeding from a deep cut. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his hair long and black, tied loosely with a strip of rawhide. His eyes opened as she knelt beside him, dark and unreadable. She didn't know he was Comanche, not until she saw the small feather charm tied around his wrist, the kind they wore for protection. She had heard stories of men like him, fierce riders, silent hunters, ghosts of the plains. And yet, in that moment, she couldn't leave him there to die. She tore a piece from her dress, pressed it against his wound, and whispered, "You'll live if you don't move." He didn't answer, only stared at her with a look that felt like a storm about to break. By nightfall, she had dragged him to the shelter of an abandoned cabin half buried in the hills. The roof leaked, the floor creaked, but it was safer than open ground. She built a small fire, melted snow in a tin cup, and did what little she could. He watched her the whole time, silent, breathing slow, the kind of man who measured every heartbeat before speaking. When he finally did, his voice was low and rough like gravel. "Why did you help me?" She didn't know the answer herself. Maybe it was mercy, maybe fear, or maybe the sight of his eyes that didn't beg, only waited. "Because you were dying," she said. His lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite gratitude. "Then you should have let me." For 2 days the storm outside trapped them inside the cabin. The snow fell heavy, sealing them in white silence. She fed the fire with broken boards, tried to ignore the tension in the air. He healed fast, faster than she thought possible. When he finally stood, towering over her, the room seemed smaller. His presence filled it like heat. There was no thanks in his voice when he said, "You saved my life." She nodded, unsure what to say. Then his tone changed, quieter but darker. "Now you'll pay for it!" She froze, her heart hammering. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You think saving a man's life comes without debt?" he said. "In my world, everything costs something." His words weren't angry. They were old, spoken like a truth learned long ago. She wanted to believe he didn't mean harm, that maybe it was just his way of speaking. But his eyes told another story, a mix of hunger, pride, and something wounded beneath it all. He wasn't a villain, but he wasn't a savior either. He was a man who had lived too long by his own laws, and she had just stepped into his world without knowing the price. Outside, the wind screamed across the plains, rattling the door. She tried to steady her breath. "I didn't do it for a reward," she said. "I did it because it was right." His gaze held hers for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Right," he echoed. "And still you changed the path of my life. You bound yourself to it." He moved closer, and for the first time she saw the faint scar on his jaw, the mark of a man who had survived too much. "The Comanche don't forget debts," he said. "Not even the ones owed by the heart." She felt the fire crackle between them, its glow trembling on his skin. For a second she thought he might leave. Instead he sat beside her, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. The silence between them was thick, filled with everything unsaid. Gratitude twisted with resentment, trust tangled with danger. He looked at her again, softer this time. "What do they call you?" She hesitated before answering, not sure if she wanted him to know. When she finally told him, he repeated her name as though he was tasting the sound of it, slow and deliberate. "You don't belong out here," he said. "This land eats the gentle," she smiled faintly. "Then it should have swallowed me by now." The next morning he was gone. Only the ashes of the fire and a single feather remained by the door. She thought she'd never see him again, and part of her hoped she wouldn't. But that hope vanished 3 nights later when she returned to the town near the old fort. People whispered there had been a raid, 2 ranchers killed, 1 soldier missing, horses stolen. And among the tracks left behind, the sheriff swore he saw the mark of a Comanche warrior. Her hands trembled as she listened, wondering if it was him. Something deep in her chest told her it was. That night, as she lay in the small rented room above the saloon, she couldn't sleep. The rain hit the window in steady rhythm, and her thoughts wouldn't rest. Every sound reminded her of him, the way he spoke, the way he looked at her as if trying to understand a language he'd never heard before. She didn't know what debt he thought she owed, but she knew he hadn't forgotten. Out there in the dark, somewhere beyond the river and the hills, he was waiting, watching. Then it happened. The door creaked open. She sat up, her breath caught in her throat. He stood there, dripping wet, his long hair clinging to his shoulders, eyes burning with something she couldn't name. "You shouldn't have come back here," he said quietly. She tried to speak, but the words died in her mouth. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You saved me once," he said, his voice steady. "And I told you you'd pay for it." His hand reached for her wrist, not rough, not gentle, but sure. "You took a life that wasn't yours to save. Now it belongs to me." For a heartbeat, she thought he might hurt her. But there was no hatred in his face, only a kind of pain, old and buried, that looked too much like her own. The air between them trembled, heavy with something neither could explain. She whispered, "What do you want from me?" His jaw tightened, his eyes lowered for just a second as though the question cut deeper than she meant it to. When he looked up again, his voice was almost a whisper. "To understand why you didn't leave me to die." The rain fell harder, thunder rolling across the plains. Somewhere in that storm, something changed between them, something neither of them could undo. He took a step closer, and though her heart raced, she didn't move away. His words were low, trembling with the weight of unspoken things. "You saved my life," he said again. "Now you'll learn what that means." The window rattled, the lamp flickered, and for a moment the world outside vanished. All that remained was the fire in his eyes and the sound of her heartbeat in the silence that followed. She didn't know whether to fear him or trust him, only that whatever came next, her life would never belong to her alone again. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the land drenched and heavy with silence. She stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass, watching him saddle his horse beneath the dripping roof. He had spent the night in the corner, awake, staring into the dim light as if haunted by something she couldn't see. He hadn't touched her, hadn't spoken another word after that last sentence, and yet his presence filled the room like a shadow that refused to fade. When she finally stepped outside, the air smelled of wet earth and smoke from the dying fire. He turned his head just enough for their eyes to meet, his expression unreadable. "You should leave this place," he said. "They'll come looking for me and for you." She didn't move. "Who will?" she asked. His gaze drifted toward the hills. "Men who think the world still belongs to them." His tone was calm, but she could feel something beneath it, anger, grief, or both. Before she could ask more, he tightened the reins, ready to ride. "You should forget what happened," he said, "and forget me." Then he was gone, vanishing into the gray morning mist. The sound of hooves faded slowly until it was swallowed by the emptiness of the land. She stood there long after he disappeared, the echo of his voice lingering in her chest. The town was restless that week. Rumors spread faster than the wind. Some said the Comanche were regrouping to strike back after the army burned one of their camps. Others whispered about a wounded warrior seen near the old ridge, half dead then gone. When she passed through the street, the saloon doors swung open and men turned to look, their voices dropping. Everyone knew she had been found wandering after the stagecoach attack, half frozen, with no clear memory of how she survived. They didn't ask questions out of kindness. They just didn't care enough to. But there was one man who did. He was the sheriff, a tired soul who'd seen too much killing to be surprised by anything anymore. He stopped her outside the general store, his hat low over his eyes, his voice rough from whiskey. "You've been keeping to yourself," he said. "That's good. But folks are talking about something you might want to hear." She waited. "A scout came in last night. Said he found a camp up north, burned again. Army patrol got ambushed. Only one survivor. Said he saw a Comanche leading the attack. Big man, scar on his jaw." Her stomach turned cold. She kept her face still, but he noticed. "You know something about that?" he asked quietly. "No," she said quickly. "I don't." He studied her for a long time, then nodded. "If you do, you'd better forget it. The army doesn't forgive the kind of mercy you showed out there." That night, she sat alone in her small room, staring at the fire until it died down to embers. She couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said before he left. You should forget me. But how could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The way he had looked when she found him bleeding. The way his voice shifted between danger and sorrow. She wanted to hate him for what he'd said, for the fear he had planted in her. But she couldn't. Deep down, she knew there was more to his story, something buried beneath the scars and silence. And against her better judgment, she wanted to know what it was. The following day, she packed her things. A few clothes, a small revolver she'd found in the ruins of the stagecoach, and the feather he had left behind. She told herself she was only leaving to find work in the next town, but her heart knew better. She followed the river north, riding through valleys where the wind whispered through the grass like a warning. At night she camped by the fire, listening to the coyotes cry. Each mile felt heavier than the last, not from fear but from the weight of something unspoken. A bond she didn't understand but couldn't break. 2 days into her journey, she came across a burned ranch. The walls were blackened, the ground littered with ashes. A man's hat lay near the well, half buried in dirt. She dismounted and walked slowly, her boots sinking in the mud. Near the doorway, she found something that made her heart stop, a carving on the wood, shaped like the same feather charm she had seen around his wrist. It was a Comanche mark, but drawn differently, gentler, almost careful. She traced her fingers over it, realizing he had been there. Maybe he was still nearby. When the sound of a rifle being cocked reached her ears, she froze. "You shouldn't have come here," said a familiar voice behind her. She turned slowly, and there he was, the same man she thought she'd never see again. His hair was tied back, his shirt torn, a streak of blood on his shoulder. His expression was hard, but his eyes flickered when he saw the shock on her face. "You followed me," he said quietly. "Why?" She struggled to find words. "Because I needed to understand," she said, "what kind of man you are." He lowered the rifle slightly, stepping closer. "You won't like what you find." She looked around the ruins. "Did you do this?" she asked. His jaw clenched. "No," he said, "but I didn't stop it either." He walked past her, picking up a broken piece of wood, staring at it like a memory. "These men traded weapons with the army. They sold whiskey to our people, poison that took everything from them. I gave them a choice to leave. They refused." His voice was calm, but there was fire behind every word. "You call it justice?" she asked. "I call it survival," he said. She could feel the weight of his pain, but also something else. Guilt, buried deep beneath pride. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. He looked at her then, a long, quiet look that made her chest ache. "You think I saved you?" he asked. It was the other way around. "You changed what I am." His hand tightened around the rifle. "That's not something a man like me can forgive." The wind picked up, swirling ash around them. She reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "You don't have to keep running," she said. "Whatever you're fighting, it doesn't have to end like this." He didn't move for a moment, then slowly stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand," he said. "The blood that runs through me, it's not mine alone. My people are dying, and every time I spare someone, I bury another piece of them." His words were heavy, trembling with truth. "Then why did you let me live?" she whispered. His eyes softened just for a heartbeat. "Because you looked at me like I was still a man." The silence that followed felt endless. She could hear her own pulse, the soft crackle of burning wood somewhere in the distance. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "They'll come after me soon. Soldiers, bounty men, anyone who wants a reason to kill. If they find you with me, they won't ask why." She shook her head. "I'm not afraid." His expression hardened again. "You should be." He turned away, walking toward his horse. "Go back to town," he said without looking at her. "Forget the man you met on that road." She stepped forward, her voice breaking. "And if I can't?" He stopped, his shoulders tense. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he turned, his eyes burning like the sunset behind him. "Then you'll have to live with what comes next." Thunder rumbled somewhere far off. She stood in the ruins, watching as he rode away once more, disappearing into the storm. The wind carried his words back to her, a warning or maybe a promise. "You saved my life," he had said. "Now you'll pay for it." And though she still didn't know what kind of price he meant, deep inside she could feel it. The debt between them wasn't of blood or vengeance, but of fate itself. That night she camped near the river, the moonlight silvering the water. The feather lay beside her on the blanket, trembling in the breeze. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was near, Not watching, but guarding. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, she imagined his silhouette among the trees, still keeping distance, still fighting something neither of them could name. The prairie stretched endless ahead of her, and she knew there was no turning back. Whatever path she had stepped onto that day, she pulled him from the fire. It was no longer hers to choose. And far away under the same sky, he sat alone by his horse, staring into the flames. He touched the scar on his jaw, remembering her voice, her eyes, the way she refused to look away. He had buried too many ghosts to believe in mercy, yet she had given him one he could never repay. In the quiet of the night, he whispered to no one, "You should have let me die." But even he knew it was already too late. The debt had changed him, bound him to her in a way no law of man or tribe could undo. And somewhere in the shadows between them, fate waited, patient and unrelenting, for the moment when both would finally understand what it truly meant to pay for saving a life. The river ran low and slow for 3 days, and she followed it north until the banks rose into cottonwoods and the land smelled like wet bark and horse sweat. Signs of trouble showed up in small ways first. A set of boot prints along the sand, a torn strap near a water crossing, ashes from a camp where the fire had been stamped out in a hurry. She found a cartridge casing by a willow root and held it up to the light, feeling the weight of it, thinking of the men who would come hunting. Frontier towns did not forgive, and soldiers forgave even less. Somewhere ahead, the Comanche warrior she had saved was moving fast and quiet, drawing danger like iron draws lightning. At dusk, she reached a weathered line cabin used by drovers in spring. The door hung by a single hinge. A saddle blanket lay folded on a chair with a playing card tucked beneath it. She turned the card over and saw a rough star drawn in coal. Not a soldier's mark. Her breath went sharp. Bounty men. She knew the type from the saloon. Hard mouths, dead eyes. The smell of old tobacco ground into their coats. They had a way of speaking soft while tying a noose. She checked the floor for sign, then the yard. Tracks fanned south toward a cut in the ridge. The hunter's path. She lit a small fire only long enough to heat water and clean her revolver. The cylinder dragged a little. She oiled it, feeling the grit give way. This was a tool, nothing more. The real fight, she knew, lived elsewhere. It lived in choices and debts and the way a man's voice could carry a life across a room. When she lay down, sleep came in pieces. She dreamed of the stagecoach, of smoke and broken glass, of finding him in the wreckage with his eyes fixed on the sky like a man listening for a name. In the gray hour before dawn, riders reached the cabin. She heard them before she saw them, the hush of leather, the wet clatter of bits. She slipped out the back and circled through the trees until she could see the yard. 3 men. One wore a cavalry coat without insignia. Another had a scar that pulled the corner of his mouth into a half grin. The third was the sheriff. He looked older than he had in town. The lines at his eyes cut deeper, his jaw set like a locked door. He crouched and touched the tracks she had studied the night before, then stood and scanned the tree line. "We're close," he said. The man with the scar spat. "Close gets men killed. I prefer done." The sheriff's eyes moved over the trees and, for a breath that felt too long, landed near where she hid. She held still until a crow cried and the moment passed. They rode on. She waited until their sound faded, then followed at distance, keeping to brush and stone, the way she imagined the Comanche moved. Midday heat rose off the ground in shivers. The trail led to a dry wash where a cottonwood had fallen in a storm. A rope hung from a branch, frayed. Below it, the dirt told a quiet story in scuffs and grooves. There had been a fight here, fast and hard. The sheriff's men had found someone or been found by him. She crouched and traced a mark in the dust shaped like the feather charm. He had been here and had escaped. By afternoon, the land spread into open prairie mottled with sage and ironweed. Smoke climbed in a thin line on the far horizon, and she felt the pull of it. She reached the ridge as the light turned honey-colored and found a camp that was not a camp. 3 bedrolls, but no food hung from a line. 2 ponies staked without pickets, a circle of stones cold to the touch. And there, near a low boulder, a small bundle tied with rawhide. She loosened it and found dried meat and a strip of cloth stained with herbs. Medicine. He had left it where someone desperate might find it. She understood the message. Keep moving. Do not trust the quiet. Toward night, a figure stepped from the shadow of a rock outcrop and she drew the revolver without thinking. He raised a hand, palm empty. "You're louder than last time," he said. It was him. He looked thin but unbroken, dark hair tied back, eyes steady. Wind pushed at the edges of the moment, trying to blow it away. She lowered the gun. "They're close," she said. "The sheriff. 2 others." His gaze flicked past her, reading distance the way some men read hymns. There will be more. When the army wants a thing done, they send a message first, then a wall. He touched the herbs in the bundle with a careless tenderness. You should have stayed in town. She found the answer waiting inside her and said it before fear could rework it. I couldn't. They moved together along a deer path into narrow cuts where the earth smelled like clay and secrets. He spoke little, but when he did, it came as sharp truths. The army had burned a winter camp after whiskey traders stirred trouble and blamed his people. A boy had died. An old woman had been left with her hair cut away, a shame deeper than wounds. He had taken horses in answer, and had faced a patrol that did not offer words. What she had seen at the ranch had not been a lesson, but a line drawn in a world that refused to see his dead. He did not say the names. She watched his hands while he spoke. They moved like a man who had learned to carry his grief without dropping it. As night deepened, they reached a canyon mouth where a trickle of water cut through rock. He knelt and drank, then filled a small skin and passed it to her. The water tasted like stone. Coyotes called somewhere across the flats. He looked up. They'll use a tracker, he said. Vaquero or Kiowa, someone good. Men from town step where their eyes tell them. A tracker reads where a heart slips. She thought of the sheriff, how her name had sounded in his voice when he asked if she knew anything. He's not a bad man, she said. He's a tired one. The Comanche looked at her for a long moment. Tired men do clean work for dirty orders. They climbed to a ledge that looked down over moon-washed grass. From there, the world felt still and held together by thin threads of sound. A night bird, the tick of cooling stone, far hoofbeats that could have been memory. He sat with his back to a rock wall and she sat near the edge, watching shadows move like slow water. You asked what kind of man I am, he said. I learned to be two men, one who keeps the old ways and one who speaks to men with badges. I find I am neither when both are needed. She turned. You don't have to carry it alone. He studied her face as if searching for a map he had lost long ago. No one carries a debt for free. The first shot came thin and high from the north, a tester. He moved faster than the sound could finish, pulling her low behind the rock. The second shot slapped the stone and left a powder smell in the air. He peered over the edge once, twice, in short angles. 6 men, he said. 2 hold the horses, 1 with a long gun on the ridge, the rest in a push. He checked the revolver on his belt, then looked at her. You'll run on my word? She shook her head. I'm not leaving you. His eyes hardened like ice under spring sun. You'll run or you'll make me choose between you and the fight. Don't do that to me. A voice rose from below, thin in the night air. The sheriff called her name. Not cruel, not kind. Walk away, the sheriff said. I can't pull you from this twice. She stared into the dark where she knew he stood and pictured the weight on his shoulders. Then the man with the scar spoke, words like tacks. He told a story about a bounty doubled if the warrior was taken alive. He spoke of a rope thrown over a courthouse beam. He laughed softly. The sound did something inside her that felt like a flame kissed by wind. The Comanche touched her arm and pointed to a narrow chute behind them. Go! She did not move. He chose for her. He rose clean, a shadow cutting from stone, and fired once toward the long gun. The shot cracked and a body hit rock with a sound that was small and heavy at once. Chaos opened like a gate. Horses screamed, men yelled, someone prayed without knowing it. He grabbed her hand and ran, drawing her into the chute, down a ladder of stone where moonlight pooled in pale cups. Bullets chased echoes. He did not let go. They reached a shelf where the canyon split in 2. He pushed her toward the left fork, then turned to the right, firing twice. Voices chased him and she froze, torn in 2 by fear that felt like an iron bit. She had never been good at obeying fear. She went after him. The path folded into brush, then opened into a low alcove where water seeped cold from a seam. He stood there with the sheriff at gunpoint. The man with the scar lay at the mouth of the alcove, breathing through his teeth. 2 more men were down in the brush, one cursing, one quiet. The sheriff's hat had fallen. His hair looked white in the moonlight. The warrior's gun never wavered. The sheriff's mouth worked around words that did not decide to be born. She stepped into the space without thinking, feeling heat roll off bodies, hearing the loud quiet of men who could die in the next breath. No one has to end here, she said. The sheriff's eyes found hers and held. You keep walking into fires that are not yours. She swallowed. They are now. The warrior's gaze slid to her and softened by a thread. It was a thread strong enough to hold a mountain. He lowered the gun 1 inch, no more. From beyond the brush, hoofbeats pounded and a new voice cut the night. It carried the cold of men who salt the world with orders. Army, not the ragged patrol kind. The well-fed kind who bring paper to justify iron. Lantern light bobbed between mesquite. She smelled oil and horse and the faint stink of fear that always leaks from men who do not admit it. The sheriff looked toward the light and his jaw set. "It's too late," he said. "You two run and they shoot me for treason. You stay and they hang him at sunrise." He looked at the warrior. "I can buy you minutes, not hours." The warrior nodded, small, like a man honoring a hard truth. She watched the light grow and felt the canyon change shape in her chest. She pictured the boy who had died, the old woman shorn, the burned ranch, the card with the coal star, the feather charm, the way the man before her had said she made him look like a man again. A thought formed with a calm she did not understand. "We split," she said. "You lead them east. I ride with him west along the wash. We double back at the cut and break for the open ground. They won't track us both if we make them choose." The sheriff stared. "You ride with him and you make it worse." Her voice did not shake. "It's already worse." The first lantern cleared the brush and an officer in a clean coat lifted it high. Behind him, soldiers spread like a net. The officer called the sheriff by name and asked if the work was finished. The canyon held its breath. The sheriff did something then that changed the shape of the night. He bent, picked up his hat, dusted it, and set it on his head like a man stepping onto a church floor. He turned and fired into the air, shouted that the quarry had slipped past the north ridge, pointed at tracks that were not there, and rode into the dark, drawing half the soldiers with him. The officer swore and split his men, one column for the ridge, one for the wash. The warrior was already moving. He took her hand and pulled her along the west fork, feet finding stone they could trust. Behind them came the crack of orders, the rattle of gear, the clamor of pursuit that feels like a storm wanting to grow teeth. They slid down a shale face, sending pebbles in thin rivers toward the wash. A shot snapped off the rock beside her and dust stung her cheek. He pulled her close behind a boulder, his breath warm and even. "This is where you go alone," he said, and pressed the water skin into her hands. She shook her head hard enough to make the world tilt. "You don't decide for me." He smiled then, a small, tired thing that carried 10 winters. "You decided the day you wouldn't leave me to die." Hoofbeats rolled closer. A lantern shook light over the boulder's edge. Voices cut the dark. She could see the officer's silhouette, the tilt of his chin, the surety in his posture, the righteousness that always walks beside a hanging rope. The warrior leaned close, so close she could hear the way his words cost him. "Whatever happens, you keep moving. If I fall, you carry no part of it. If I live, the debt remains." She reached up and touched the scar along his jaw, the old one that marked where the world had tried to erase him. "I don't want your debt," she said. "Then call it a crossing," he answered. 2 lives at a river that runs one way. He rose when the lantern slid past and moved like shadow cutting shadow. The first soldier never saw him. The second did and raised a shout that tore the night open. Steel and wood and breath and weight filled the canyon in one hard knot. She fired once and the sound cracked her ears. A horse reared. The officer yelled for the ridge to close, for the wash to be held, for the noose to be brought at dawn. The warrior cleared space with a fury that was not rage but resolve, then turned and met her eyes across the mess they had not chosen. "Run," he said. She ran. The wash snaked away into dark grass and the land opened, wide as judgment. Behind her, the fight churned. Ahead, the prairie waited without promise. She did not look back until the sound of it changed from chaos to something like prayer. She turned then and saw a figure break free, sprinting low. A shadow cut from the rest, moving like a man who had refused the end given to him. Soldiers swung lanterns and fired blind. The sheriff's distant shout rose from the ridge like a warning split in two. The officer cursed the dark. The night held all of it without giving any part away. She slowed and the warrior reached her, breath steady, eyes bright with that old hurt and a new heat. They stood for a heartbeat in the open, the world around them wide and merciless. Far to the east, lanterns crawled like angry stars. To the west, the river shone faint under a slice of moon. He pointed toward the water, then caught her hand again. Together they ran, not toward safety, but toward a place where the next choice would be asked of them in a voice neither of them could ignore. The grass bent around their legs and the wind climbed, full of the smell of stone and horse in the old American West. Somewhere behind them, the sheriff fired once more into the air, and the sound rolled after them like a judge learning how to doubt. They ran through the night until the stars began to fade behind a thin sheet of dawn. The river curved around a line of cottonwoods and spilled into open land. quiet except for the rhythm of hooves striking mud. She clung to the back of his horse, her hands gripping the worn leather, feeling each breath he took as they cut through the mist. When they finally stopped, the horizon was turning pink. He swung down first, scanning the tree line, his eyes sharp, calm in a way that made her heart ache. "They'll keep coming," he said. "They have horses, guns, and orders. We only have a few hours before they catch our trail." Her voice came out low. "Then we ride farther." He shook his head. "No, not yet. The horses need rest. So do you." She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit her all at once. Her legs trembled when she stepped down. He led the horse toward a patch of tall grass near the riverbank. For a moment there was only silence, the kind that comes after running from death and realizing it's still somewhere behind you. He knelt by the water, washing dirt and blood from his hands. The cuts across his arm looked deep. She moved closer, reaching for the cloth from her saddlebag. "Let me help." He didn't answer right away. When she pressed the damp fabric against his skin, he flinched slightly, then stilled. "You should have left when I told you," he said. She smiled faintly, her hand steady. "You told me to forget you too. I didn't listen then either." His eyes lifted to hers, unreadable but softer than before. "You don't understand what's waiting for me," he said. "For us." She looked out at the plains, endless and cold. "Then tell me he didn't. Not yet." He just stared toward the horizon as if trying to see through it. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke again, too distant to place but close enough to stir fear. "They're burning something," she said. "A signal," he replied. "To close the circle." He stood, tightening the strap across his chest. "When they find us, they won't stop to ask questions. They want a body to drag back." She swallowed hard. "And you?" He met her eyes. "I want them to remember I was alive before they tried to make me a ghost." They followed the river west, where the land folded into shallow hills. Each ridge revealed more emptiness, more sky. The sun climbed high, turning everything gold and cruel. They didn't speak much. There was too much between them already. Yet she couldn't help watching the way he moved, silent and alert, like the world around him belonged to a language she'd never learned. Sometimes he glanced back, checking her pace, his face unreadable. But there was a flicker of something like worry that slipped through his control. By midday they reached an old mission ruin, its stone walls half collapsed and the cross above the doorway leaning crookedly. "We can stop here," he said. Inside, the air was cool, thick with dust. Faded paint clung to the walls, saints and angels, their faces cracked and peeling. She touched one gently, the rough surface beneath her fingers. "Used to be a place for prayers," she said quietly. "Now it's just a shelter." He looked around, then dropped his rifle against the wall. Sometimes that's all prayer ever was. She unpacked what little food they had, a bit of jerky and stale bread. As they ate, she asked him what he planned to do once the soldiers gave up. He didn't answer right away. "They won't," he said finally. "They need to make an example. Killing one man means nothing to them. It's about control, fear." His gaze drifted to the door. "They burned my camp for the same reason. To remind us what happens when we live without permission." She nodded slowly. "And now they'll call you the danger." His jaw tightened. "They already do." Outside, a hawk circled. The sound of distant thunder echoed, but it wasn't from the sky. Hoofbeats, faint but growing. He rose instantly. "They've found us." She looked toward the door, her heart pounding. "How?" "Doesn't matter. We move." He grabbed the rifles, threw her the saddlebag. They sprinted through the rear archway into the brush beyond the mission. The sound behind them grew louder. 6, maybe 7 horses. The metallic rhythm of pursuit. They reached a narrow ravine, the sides steep and crumbling. "Down here," he said. They slid through the loose dirt, stones tumbling beside them. At the bottom, the river ran thin and fast. He pulled her close, pressing her against the rock. "Stay quiet." The riders appeared above the ridge moments later, shadows against the sun. She recognized one, the sheriff. He called out, his voice rough with dust. "You can't run forever. It'll end the same way." The Comanche said nothing. His hand rested lightly on his rifle, waiting. They stayed hidden until the riders moved on, the sound fading again. When they finally climbed out, her hands were trembling. "He's still trying to save you," she said softly. "The sheriff. He's leading them off when he can." The Comanche looked out over the dry plain. "He's trying to save himself. There's a difference." She shook her head. "You don't believe in mercy?" His answer came like a low wind. "Mercy is what men offer when they've already taken too much. The afternoon stretched long and heavy. They followed an old trail marked by wagon ruts, half buried under dust. Each mile brought a strange calm, the kind that sits before a storm. She thought about the sheriff, about the way he had looked at her before the chase began. Maybe he was right. Maybe this would all end in blood. But something deeper inside her whispered that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth. His, hers, and the one they both feared to face. When night came, they built no fire. The stars burned cold above them, endless and sharp. He sat near the horse cleaning his rifle, while she lay wrapped in her blanket watching him. The silence between them had changed. No longer awkward, but thick with something unspoken. Finally, she asked, "What happens if they catch you?" He didn't look up. "They'll hang me, or shoot me trying. And if they catch me," he paused, then met her eyes. "They'll call you what they always call women who choose wrong. They'll make sure you wear it forever." She turned away, tears burning behind her eyes. "Then what's the point of running?" His answer came slow. "Because freedom is still worth dying with your own name." The words stayed with her long after he fell asleep. She lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the soft shift of wind through grass. Somewhere out there, the soldiers were closing in, their torches flickering like false stars. By dawn, the trail was gone. The wind had covered it with sand, but they both knew the hunters wouldn't stop. He walked ahead, scanning the horizon, his shoulders tense. "We can reach the canyon before midday," he said. "It's narrow. They'll have to come single file. If they do, we'll make a stand there." She stopped walking. "You mean fight them?" He turned to her, his face unreadable. "If it comes to that. And what if we don't win? Then they'll remember who we were." The canyon came into view by late morning, carved deep and dark into the earth. The sound of running water echoed faintly within. It looked like a place that had seen death before and never spoken of it. He led the horse down carefully, finding cover beneath a rocky outcrop. From there, they could see the plains stretching for miles and the small moving dots on the far edge of the horizon. Riders. She counted 6, maybe more. Her throat tightened. "They're coming." He loaded his rifle, his movements calm and deliberate. "Then it's time." She wanted to say something, to stop him, to tell him there had to be another way, but her voice wouldn't come. Instead, she stepped closer, placing her hand against his arm. "You don't have to do this alone." He looked at her then, really looked as if memorizing her face. "I was alone the day they burned my people," he said. "Not anymore." The wind picked up, tossing her hair across her face. In the distance, the riders drew nearer, their horses cutting through the haze. She could hear the faint clang of metal, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. The sheriff's voice rose above the rest, shouting orders. She saw the glint of sunlight on his badge. He was leading them now, no longer hiding his hand. The Comanche steadied his rifle, eyes fixed on the ridge. "They'll come through that pass first," he said. "We'll have one shot before they see us." She nodded, her heart hammering. "And if we miss?" He looked at her, calm as ever. "Then we find another way to live." The first rider appeared on the ridge, the horse outlined against the bright sky. She recognized the scarred man from before, his rifle ready. Behind him came 2 soldiers, then the sheriff. They fanned out, cautious, scanning the canyon walls. One of them shouted something. She couldn't make out the words, and the sound bounced off the stone, echoing like thunder. He took aim. The world seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind and the faint tremble of her heartbeat. Then, before he could fire, a gunshot cracked, not his. The rock beside him shattered. Dust sprang across his face. They had seen him. The soldiers charged, bullets sparking against the canyon walls. He pulled her down, returning fire, each shot echoing like a drumbeat of fate. The horse screamed, hit by a stray bullet. The canyon filled with noise, shouting, gunfire, the grind of boots on stone. He moved fast, every motion precise, his body a blur of strength and instinct. She reloaded, hands shaking, firing toward the ridge to keep them back. The sheriff's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down. You don't have to die here." But the Comanche didn't stop. He fired again, the shot striking close enough to scatter the soldiers. Then silence fell, heavy and waiting. Smoke hung in the air. She could hear her own breath, ragged and thin. He glanced at her, a streak of blood across his cheek, his eyes burning. "They won't stop now," he said. "It ends here." She shook her head, voice breaking. "No, not like this." He smiled, a tired, almost gentle smile. You saved my life once.
Now I save yours." Before she could speak, he rose, stepping into the open canyon where the light poured down like fire.
The sheriff shouted his name, but he kept walking, each step echoing louder than the last. The soldiers raised their rifles, waiting for the order. She watched, frozen, her heart twisting with every breath. The world had narrowed to that moment. One man standing against the tide, one woman praying to stop it, and the long shadow of fate falling between them. The moment stretched like a string pulled to breaking. He stood in the sunlight, framed by the canyon walls, his shoulders squared, the rifle hanging loose in his hands. The soldiers waited, dust swirling around their boots. The sheriff's hand trembled near his holster, torn between duty and something that looked like regret. She wanted to call out, to stop him from stepping farther, but her voice caught in her throat. The Comanche warrior looked back once, his eyes meeting hers. In them she saw everything, gratitude, sorrow, and a quiet acceptance that chilled her more than fear ever could. Then he raised his hand, not in surrender, but as if to say goodbye to the life that had carried them both this far. The soldiers shouted. Guns fired. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder splitting stone. She dropped to her knees, the world spinning around her. When the dust cleared, he was still standing, one hand pressed against his chest, the other gripping the rifle tight. He stumbled once, caught himself, then fired a single shot that struck the ridge above, sending rock and dust raining down. It forced the soldiers back long enough for the sheriff to yell for them to stop shooting. But the damage was done. The warrior sank slowly to one knee, the sunlight burning across his face like a crown. She ran to him before anyone could stop her, sliding across the dirt, her hands catching his shoulders. His blood was warm beneath her fingers. He smiled faintly. "You should have gone," he said, voice soft as wind. Tears blurred her vision. "I told you I wouldn't." He tried to speak again, but the words came shallow. "Now you'll remember me. As a man, not a ghost." She shook her head, clutching him tighter. "You're not gone yet. You're not." He looked past her then, at the sky, at the hawk circling high above. His lips curved just slightly. "The sky remembers us all." Then his hand fell from hers. The sheriff reached them a moment later, his face pale under the dust. "I told them to hold fire," he muttered. "God help me, I told them." He knelt beside her, eyes on the man lying between them. He fought like he wanted to be free. She looked up, her voice trembling. He was free. The soldiers stood in silence, the wind the only sound left. No one spoke when she closed his eyes. The canyon felt hollow, sacred somehow, as if the earth itself was holding its breath to listen. They buried him by the river where the cottonwoods grew. The sheriff gave her his coat to wrap around her shoulders, and she stayed there until the last light faded. When it was done, she tied the feather charm around a branch above the grave. The sheriff stood beside her, hat in hand. "You can't stay here," he said quietly. "The army'll call it aiding a fugitive. You'll be safer in town." She stared at the river, its slow, rippling surface catching the fading sun. "Safe isn't what I came here for," he sighed, looking out across the plains. "You know, I used to believe a badge meant something, that it made a man different. But out here," he paused, shaking his head. "Out here it's just another piece of metal, same as the bullet that took him." His voice cracked on the last word. She glanced at him, seeing the years carved deep into his face. "You tried," she said. "Sometimes that's all a man can do." He left before dawn the next morning, promising to tell the soldiers the fugitive died fighting alone. She watched him ride away until he became a shadow against the horizon. Then she turned back to the grave and sat there as the first light touched the plains. For the first time in days, she felt the stillness settle deep in her bones. Not peace exactly, but the quiet that comes after everything has been said and lost. Days passed. The soldiers moved on. The town forgot, as towns always did. She stayed near the river, fixing up the small cabin that stood not far from where they buried him. She patched the roof, cleared the brush, and planted a few wildflowers near the door. The land that once felt cruel began to breathe again. Softer now, though it still carried the memory of the man who had walked it with fire in his blood. Some nights when the wind blew through the cottonwoods, it sounded like the faint whisper of a song. His song. One evening, weeks later, the sheriff returned. His horse was tired, his coat dusty. He dismounted slowly, his eyes tracing the small life she'd made there. "You really stayed," he said. She nodded. "Someone should." He looked toward the riverbank where the feather still hung. "They talk about him in town now," he said. "Some call him a murderer, some a ghost. But one boy said he heard the story from a drifter who swore the Comanche saved a woman's life. Said she saved his first. Her eyes softened. Maybe that's the story that should live. He nodded and took something from his pocket, a small tin star, worn at the edges. I can't wear this anymore, he said, setting it on the table. I did what I could, but sometimes doing right costs more than a man's got to give. She looked at the star, then at him. He forgave you, she said. Maybe you should try doing the same. He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maybe someday. Then he turned and rode away again, leaving her with the wind, the river, and the ghosts of both men who had carried her through that storm. Seasons changed. The cabin became part of the land, the way old stories do when no one's left to tell them loud. Travelers passing through sometimes spoke of a woman who lived alone by the water, who carried the calm of someone who'd seen too much and learned not to speak of it. They said she buried a warrior there once. Some claimed they'd seen her at night, standing by the grave under the moonlight whispering to someone unseen. Others said they'd heard the faint sound of hoofbeats on windless nights. She grew older, but her heart never hardened. She kept the feather charm tied by the door, brushing her fingers across it each morning as if it could still keep her safe. Sometimes she dreamed of him, the sound of his voice, the steady rhythm of his breath beside a campfire, the warmth in his eyes when he said she changed what he was. She never forgot the weight of those words or the price they both paid for them. Years later, when settlers came through and built a small town upriver, they found her cabin empty. The door swung open in the wind, and the only thing left inside was the feather charm resting on the table beside the worn tin star. They buried her beside him, under the same tree, facing the same river. The inscription on the wooden marker read simply, "She saved a life," and in doing so found her own. Long after, when the land turned to dust and the river shifted its course, people still told the story of the woman and the Comanche warrior. Some said it was love, others said it was destiny, but those who listened closer understood it was something deeper. A story about the cost of mercy, the meaning of freedom, and the quiet courage it takes to stand beside someone when the world calls them enemy. The land changed, but their story remained. The wind still whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the faint trace of his voice and her laughter, mingling like two parts of the same song. The river still ran, washing away the footprints of those who came after, yet never touching the place where their names lived on in silence. Somewhere out there, where the plains meet the horizon, a hawk still circles under the same wide sky. And when the light hits just right, the world looks the way it did that morning when she first found him. Broken, beautiful, and waiting for someone brave enough to care. In the end, no one really remembered the soldiers or the battles or the reasons that drove them apart. What they remembered was simpler: a wounded man who refused to die, a woman who refused to leave him, and the small corner of the world where mercy dared to take root. Their story became part of the land itself, whispered in the wind, carried by the water, alive in every place where love and loss walk side by side beneath the old American sky.